started like any ordinary afternoon, quiet enough to ignore, normal enough to forget, until she walked in with a look that said the world owed her compliance. No shouting yet, no drama yet, just a smile sharpened by certainty, the kind that makes staff uneasy and bystanders curious. Everyone had seen this type before, but no one expected how fast things would unravel. She arrived convinced the rules were for other people. Policies were obstacles, signs were suggestions, and employees were merely background characters in her personal storyline. She moved with purpose, bypassing instructions posted in bold letters, dismissing polite reminders with a wave of her hand. To her, authority was optional, and respect was something she received, not gave. The tension crept in slowly, like a low hum beneath normal conversation. Almost easy to miss unless you were paying attention. An employee noticed first, then another. A brief exchange followed, calm, professional, reasonable. She smiled wider, nodded, and did exactly what she wanted anyway. That was the moment eyes began to follow her path. Whispers replaced small talk, phones lowered. People sensed a collision coming, the kind you don't step away from because you want to see how it ends. What she didn't realize was that rules exist for a reason, and the people enforcing them had already dealt with far worse attitudes than hers. Every step she took deeper into defiance tightened the net around her, though she mistook patience for weakness. She believed compliance could be demanded, exceptions assumed, and consequences negotiated away with attitude alone. By the time she finally crossed the line, there was no applause, no sympathy, and no escape. Just silence, followed by a response she never saw coming. This wasn't about winning an argument anymore. It was about accountability, and the moment it arrived would change everything for everyone watching. The room itself felt like it was holding its breath. Walls listening, clocks slowing, air thick with anticipation. No one intervened because curiosity is powerful, and moments like this feel rare. She mistook the quiet for agreement, the stillness for surrender. In reality, procedures were already in motion, documentation already started, decisions already made beyond her control. Every rule she ignored added weight to what was coming next, stacking consequences neatly, patiently, and without emotion. What followed would expose the gap between entitlement and reality, proving that confidence without boundaries collapses quickly under pressure, especially when everyone else finally stops indulging. The response didn't come loudly. That was the first thing she misunderstood. There was no raised voice, no dramatic confrontation, no public scolding to fuel her sense of importance. Instead, there was a pause, a deliberate one, the kind that signals control shifting hands. The employee who had been speaking to her stopped explaining and simply nodded, stepping aside as if the conversation had already ended. That small movement unsettled her more than shouting ever could. She scoffed, mistaking silence for victory. With a dismissive laugh, she continued exactly as before, pushing further into restricted space, confident that no one would dare stop her. In her mind, rules bent for people who acted like they owned the room. She expected resistance, because resistance validated her power. What she got instead was calm coordination happening just out of her awareness. Behind her, two staff members exchanged a glance. Not frustration, not fear, familiarity. This wasn't their first encounter with someone who believed policies were optional. One quietly picked up a radio. Another opened a tablet, fingers moving with practiced precision. No rush, no panic, just process. The kind that only begins when a line has clearly been crossed. A nearby customer noticed and leaned closer, curiosity sharpening their expression. Others followed. Conversations faded. The atmosphere changed, like weather turning without warning. She felt it then, that subtle shift, but pride kept her from acknowledging it. Instead, she doubled down, voice louder now, peppered with entitlement and impatience. She demanded exceptions without asking for them, listing imaginary reasons why she was different, why her time mattered more. That was when someone finally spoke again, not to argue, not to negotiate, just a single sentence delivered evenly, explaining what would happen next if she didn't comply. It wasn't a threat. It was a statement, clear, documented, final. She laughed. A short, sharp sound meant to humiliate. "You can't do that," she said, certainty dripping from every word. "I know how this works." But she didn't. What she knew was how things worked when people backed down. What she didn't understand was how systems respond when patience runs out. The moment she waved off that warning, the last door quietly closed behind her. Consequences don't always arrive dramatically. Sometimes they're activated. A uniformed figure appeared at the edge of the room, unhurried, observant, already informed. Another followed. Their presence alone drew a hard line between assumption and reality. For the first time, her smile faltered. The room wasn't on her side anymore. It never had been. The uniformed officers didn't rush in or raise their voices. They simply stood where they were, letting their presence do the work. That calm authority cut through the room like a blade. Conversation stopped completely now. Every eye locked onto the unfolding moment, sensing that this was no longer entertainment. This was procedure. This was real. She noticed them late. Too late. Her posture stiffened, confidence scrambling to rearrange itself into something believable. She tried to laugh again, but it came out thinner, forced, as if humor could rewind the last few minutes. She turned toward the nearest employee, suddenly polite, suddenly cooperative, offering explanations that hadn't existed before. The rules hadn't changed. Only her awareness had. One officer stepped forward and spoke quietly, asking her to accompany them so they could resolve the situation. No accusations. No insults. Just a request backed by authority. She hesitated, scanning the room for support, for someone to agree with her, to nod, to say this was unfair. No one did. Faces that once watched with curiosity now reflected discomfort, relief, even mild satisfaction. She argued anyway. Not loudly, but insistently. Stacking excuses like shields. She claimed misunderstandings, poor communication, special circumstances. Each word bounced harmlessly off the process already in motion. The officer listened, nodded once, then repeated the request. Firmer this time. Final. That was when frustration cracked through her composure. Her voice rose. She accused. She blamed. She demanded managers, supervisors, anyone higher than the people standing right in front of her. What she didn't realize was that escalation had already peaked. There was nowhere higher to climb from here. A second officer stepped closer, positioning themselves just enough to close the space. Not aggressive, controlled, precise. The message was unmistakable. Options were narrowing, compliance or consequence. Her face flushed as she realized the room wasn't holding its breath anymore. It was watching the end. When she finally agreed to step aside, it wasn't victory. It was retreat. Phone subtly angled downward. Whispers resumed, softer now, tinged with judgment. She walked with forced dignity, head high, shoulders tense, pretending this was temporary, fixable, still negotiable. But paperwork doesn't forget. Cameras don't blink. Statements don't change. Every ignored sign, every dismissed warning, every confident rule-breaking decision was already recorded. What she thought was a minor inconvenience was becoming something permanent. As the doors closed behind her, the normal sounds of the place slowly returned. But the lesson lingered in the air, unmistakable and heavy. Rules don't bend for confidence. They wait. Behind the closed doors, the tone changed completely. There was no audience now, no one to impress, no crowd to dominate with confidence alone. Just neutral walls, quiet authority, and a process that moved forward whether she liked it or not. The officers asked standard questions, calm and methodical, giving her every opportunity to explain herself clearly. This wasn't punishment yet. It was assessment. She tried a new approach. Softer voice. Cooperative posture. She emphasized misunderstandings, suggested the rules hadn't been clear, implied that others had been treated differently before. She even apologized, carefully, conditionally, as if remorse could be calculated and exchanged for leniency. The officers listened without interruption, noting details, confirming timelines, cross-checking facts already documented elsewhere. That's when reality tightened its grip. They referenced exact times, camera angles, posted signage, and prior warnings she had received minutes earlier. Each detail landed with precision, dismantling her narrative piece by piece. There was no hostility in their delivery, which made it worse. Facts don't argue, they conclude. With every clarification, her explanations grew shorter, less confident, until silence filled the gaps. She asked what would happen next. It was a reasonable question, but the answer wasn't comforting. Consequences were outlined plainly, without emotion. A formal notice. A recorded incident. temporary restrictions moving forward. Nothing dramatic, nothing excessive, just enough to matter, just enough to follow her beyond this room. Her expression shifted from defiance to disbelief. This wasn't what she had imagined. She had expected a warning at most, a verbal reminder, maybe an apology from staff for overreacting. Instead, she was being processed like anyone else who ignored clear rules. Equal treatment, she realized too late, doesn't always feel fair when you're used to exceptions. She tried one last time to negotiate, asking if they could let it go this once. The response was immediate and final. Policies aren't enforced once, they're enforced consistently, or they stop being rules at all. That sentence ended the discussion. When the officers finished, they stood, signaling the interaction was complete. She was escorted back out, not in handcuffs, not humiliated, but undeniably corrected. The walk felt longer this time. The same space she had crossed earlier with confidence now felt narrower, heavier, aware. Outside, life continued as if nothing extraordinary had happened. But for her, something had shifted permanently. Reputation, record, memory, all altered by a moment she had assumed didn't matter. As the doors closed behind her again, one truth remained undeniable. Rules don't exist to be tested. They exist to be followed. She stepped outside into the open air, expecting relief, but it didn't come. The noise of the world felt louder now, sharper, like it was reminding her that life hadn't paused for her lesson. Cars passed, people laughed, someone checked their phone. Everything was normal, and that somehow made it worse. Consequences rarely announce themselves with drama. They settle quietly and stay. She stood there for a moment, replaying the scene in her head, rewriting it the way she wished it had gone. If only she'd spoken differently. If only she'd listened. If only she hadn't assumed. But reality doesn't accept edits. What happened inside those walls was already filed, recorded, and remembered by people who would move on, even if she couldn't. Inside, the staff returned to their routines. A brief conversation here, a relieved exhale there, then back to work. For them, it was another incident handled correctly. Proof that rules mattered, that patience had limits, and that consistency protected everyone involved. They didn't celebrate. They didn't mock. They simply continued. Because systems don't need validation to function. The bystanders carried the story with them in pieces. Some would retell it later, emphasizing the moment her confidence cracked. Others would remember the calm professionalism that ended the situation without chaos. A few would quietly adjust their own behavior next time, reminded that signs and policies weren't decorative. Lessons ripple outward, even when no one intends them to. As for her, the shift was subtle but real. Next time she encountered a rule, she paused. Just a second longer than before. Enough to read the sign, enough to listen, enough to consider that exceptions aren't owed, and authority doesn't respond to attitude. The world hadn't changed. She had. Mistakes don't always destroy you. Sometimes they recalibrate you. But that only happens if you accept them instead of denying them. The cost she paid wasn't public humiliation or harsh punishment. It was something quieter. The loss of certainty that she was above the system. And that's the part people misunderstand. Rules don't exist to challenge ego. They exist to remove it from the equation. They create order where entitlement would otherwise thrive. When someone believes they don't apply, the correction is inevitable. Not because of spite, but because consistency is the backbone of fairness. She thought the rules didn't apply to her. That belief lasted minutes. The lesson will last much longer.